if this thing's going, because I think it's going to 1 million, then it's going to 10 million, then the dollar's worthless and we buy things in sats. So do you want to have zero of that thing that we're going to use to buy stuff in the future? I don't. I want to own it. What I say to people is I still think 50% pullbacks are possible. So whatever you buy, I think you have to be mentally in your mind, recognize it could lose half its value and know that you wouldn't panic, know that you wouldn't sell. And in fact, if that did happen, you'd be thinking to yourself, what else can I sell to take advantage of this bargain, right? Whenever you go into Bitcoin, you always feel like you're overpaying. But guess what? The power of compounding means that in 5 or 10 years, you'll be really glad you did it. And if you don't, then in 5 or 10 years, you'll be thinking, Christ, now I got to pay $1 million a coin? I could have bought it for 100, right? That's kind of how it's going to happen, in my view.
One of the key points Lepard emphasizes is that Bitcoin has historically followed a pattern of higher highs and higher lows through each cycle. Even with periodic pullbacks, the long-term trajectory remains bullish. He references previous Bitcoin cycles, explaining that while corrections do occur, they are becoming less severe over time. Lepard shares his model, predicting that the current cycle could push Bitcoin to the $200,000 to $250,000 range, possibly even touching $300,000 before a significant pullback. If history repeats itself, he envisions a correction to around $150,000, which would still be an incredibly bullish outcome. From there, his long-term projection sees Bitcoin rallying towards $700,000 and beyond in the next phases of adoption.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
One thing that has been true historically, with maybe I think one exception, is it's always been higher highs and higher lows on these pullbacks. And so my sense is that, my model is kind of we're at 100 is 105 now or something. My model is this run takes us, if you kind of look at the past cycles, this run takes us to 200, 250, maybe 300. And by the way, maybe then it gets a little over its skis, everyone's a little overextended, everyone's, too much hype, and it comes back to 150. You know what I mean? And that would strike me as entirely possible and entirely doable and not out of the ordinary. And then from the 150, it goes to 700. That's kind of the pattern that it's followed, and that's all we really have to go on. But we've now been through a bunch of halvings and a bunch of cycles and a bunch of pullbacks. So, I expect those to continue. There has been a trend where each pullback is less severe than the prior one. I think the first pullback was like 90%. I recall I had lunch with Max in the Middle East, and he said, yeah, when I first started pushing it, it went up to 20, and then it corrected to 1. And I had people calling me up and saying, dude, you've wrecked my retirement, you've killed me. He said people were, he said it was the hardest time ever in Bitcoin because people were just really, really pissed off at him. And he said, I don't care. Buy it at 1, don't sell. And, some listened to him, some didn't. Those who listened to him obviously are very well set right now. I will say in terms of price predictions, I kind of use the power law model that Stenosazi and Kruger have worked up as kind of, to me, that's kind of a base layer of, compound annual growth in the 30-40% a year for a bunch of years with swings around that. I also, though, am aware that, as Saylor says, we're kind of in that Bitcoin golden age where, it feels to me like we're kind of at the Malcolm Gladwell tipping point where we're, it's now, people are talking about it. You got an ETF. I'll say in my personal circles, everyone now knows I'm a Bitcoin guy and everyone's asking me a lot of questions. And that didn't happen a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Almost everyone I know is trying to figure out, what do I do with this thing? What is this thing? What do I do with it? That's different. And so I think we could very easily enter a cycle here where, and very smart people who say, no, Larry, you're wrong. It's not just going to 250 and correct. We're going to 500, 700, a million in the next 2 years. Nation state adoption and FOMO, just all the kind of stuff. And they could be right. I just don't know. I don't want to predict that with certainty. And I'm not selling anything close to any of these prices. So I don't, I think it's going to be worth millions of coin. And, then maybe when I retire, I'll slowly sell some off to, pay my daily bills. But, my sense is that, we're entering the steep part of the adoption curve. And I would not, just as you point out, your friend's waiting for pullback. I wouldn't count on pullbacks emerging. I've had several people come to me and say, well, should I plop buy or should I dollar cost average? I'm like, I think you should plop buy, but maybe if you want to, if that would make you feel uncomfortable, what I say to people is I still think 50% pullbacks are possible. So whatever you buy, I think you have to be mentally in your mind, recognize it could lose half its value and know that you wouldn't panic, know that you wouldn't sell. And in fact, if that did happen, you'd be thinking to yourself, what else can I sell to take advantage of this bargain, right? So, maybe a new person coming to it, maybe you put, 70% of your money in, you keep the other 30 in case you get a pullback. But like there's some chance that that other 30 never gets deployed at a price lower than today because it could just run hard here for a few more years. If this thing's going, because I think it's going to $1 million, then it's going to 10 million, then the dollar's worthless and we buy things in sats. So do you want to have zero of that thing that we're going to use to buy stuff in the future? I don't. I want to own it, And so I say, look, I've had some great meetings with Max. I love the guy. Hey, Max said, shit, I was pissed off I had to pay $1 or $2 when Trace was buying it for 50 cents, Trace Meyer. Right. And so everybody thinks you're overpaying. Whenever you go into Bitcoin, you always feel like you're overpaying. But guess what? The power of compounding means that in 5 or 10 years, you'll be really glad you did it. And if you don't, then in 5 or 10 years, you'll be thinking, Christ, now I got to pay $1 million a coin. I could have bought it for 100. Right. That's kind of how it's going to happen, in my view.
One of the key points Lepard emphasizes is that Bitcoin has historically followed a pattern of higher highs and higher lows through each cycle. Even with periodic pullbacks, the long-term trajectory remains bullish. He references previous Bitcoin cycles, explaining that while corrections do occur, they are becoming less severe over time. Lepard shares his model, predicting that the current cycle could push Bitcoin to the $200,000 to $250,000 range, possibly even touching $300,000 before a significant pullback. If history repeats itself, he envisions a correction to around $150,000, which would still be an incredibly bullish outcome. From there, his long-term projection sees Bitcoin rallying towards $700,000 and beyond in the next phases of adoption.
Go Google Michael Saylor Atlas Society speech 2024 and listen to it. It's about an hour and change. I love it because, as you know, he's an engineer out of MIT, an aerospace engineer. And what he does in this speech is he just kind of walks through technological changes through the history of mankind. He starts back with Prometheus and fire, right? And the wheel. But he quickly goes through kind of every single change that then led to something else and more development. And, the way the printing press obviously led to everybody reading, and the way, heliocentricity changing led to, it's a master class in how technology causes society to evolve. And when you hear it, if you're like me, I think what you will conclude is that, oh my goodness, this is just the next step. This is not, it's radical, it's different, it's hard to get your arms around, but it's just a logical progression that you cannot stop, and it is going to happen. And so to all the Bitcoin deniers, all the Bitcoin haters, all the people who aren't paying attention, I'm kind of like, time is not on your side. Explain to me what you think is going to make it stop or change it. A while back, there was a decent argument. I would try to convince people to buy Bitcoin, and they would say, well, I get it, and I get the ideal, but the government's going to stop this. They're not going to let somebody else have another form of money. Well, then the ETF got approved, and I was like, oh, so that argument, now they may still come back and try and stop it, don't get me wrong. When it really existentially threatens their power, we may see something different happening, especially if we had a blue administration. But, when they endorsed it, when they let the ETF through, I was like, oh boy, they have no idea. Because there's no going back now. All of that capital that's in the stock market can now buy Bitcoin. Oh boy. So here we are. It was always in the background. I was always a collector of gold and silver coins. I always kind of knew that sound money was the right thing to have, but we hadn't really had it since '71. And I was kind of watching the inflation, but I was, I wasn't all sound. I mean, now I'm kind of all sound money all the time. That's all I do. I mean, as the book will tell you, and I tell a lot of anecdotes and stories from it. You know, I was actually in the venture capital and the technology business, investing in technology companies from 1983 till mid 2000s. You know, my father was fortunate and was very tuned into what was going on in technology, and like the scene in The Graduate, plastics. I mean, he said, if I were you, I'd figure out a way to get involved in these microprocessors. This shit's going to be big. And I listened to him. And so I invested in technology, you know, and it worked. I mean, and I watched it change the world. And you know, look, maybe that's why I've been able to kind of make the leap from gold to Bitcoin, because I had a technical background and I invested in the internet when the internet came out, and I could see, you know, to me, investing is very much pattern recognition to me. You see kind of the same things happen over and over again. Not the same, but they rhyme, right? And so what happened is you know, the Bitcoin came out. I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. And of course, I fucked up, and I blew it, because there were a bunch of other people who tried to do it in the 80s and 90s. You know, there was, I don't know, eGold and DigiCash and B-Money and I mean, they all failed because they didn't, you know, they hadn't figured it out. They didn't have, they hadn't solved, you know, the Byzantine generals problem. But, and so when Bitcoin first came out, I thought, oh yeah, sure, right, that's going to fail too, because all these others did. You know, a mental heuristic, right? And that's why when Max was talking about it 1 or 2, I was listening to him. I liked Max. He was a silver and gold guy before he was a Bitcoiner. But I was like, shit, Max, no, it's going to fail. But then when it got to $100, I was like, well, hang on a second. Maybe it's not going to fail. Maybe I got to pay attention here. And so I started paying attention. But, you know, I think that technology investing background allowed me to look at it once I started to understand it, and I thought it was kind of like, gee, this is just like the internet. And when the internet, I was very lucky. I was a venture capital investor, and I started investing in the internet in 1993. And you know, the Netscape browser didn't come out to 95, and the original hookup, you know, everything was a dial-up internet provider. You know, you had to put a phone in a modem, and you know, and all it was slow. And I mean, there was like, what the hell did you know, nobody gives a shit about this. I mean, Krugman said it's not useful. Right. And I was kind of like, well, I don't know. I think it's a pretty powerful idea. I mean, if we could all, you know, send email instantly all around the world and talk to each other. And of course, I couldn't foresee that we were going to be talking video from London to Florida and all that kind of, you know, I mean, all the things that have occurred, but I could foresee that it was going to continually get better. Right. Yeah. And that's what, you know, and so, you know, now using that model, I can look at Bitcoin and people say, well, it's not used as a medium of exchange. And they're right. I mean, the number of, you know, Lightning transfers is growing very rapidly, but you know, nobody uses Bitcoin to pay their bills. It's, you know, it's just not, it's clunky, it's too expensive, but that'll change, you know, just as the internet was originally green screen and not terribly useful, but that changed. And the technology will definitely make all of this easier, better, faster, etc. And so, you know, it made it, I mean, I just have a sense of deja vu. I mean, to me, you know, Bitcoin is just, you know, the internet for money. I mean, it's that simple.
One of the key points Lepard emphasizes is that Bitcoin has historically followed a pattern of higher highs and higher lows through each cycle. Even with periodic pullbacks, the long-term trajectory remains bullish. He references previous Bitcoin cycles, explaining that while corrections do occur, they are becoming less severe over time. Lepard shares his model, predicting that the current cycle could push Bitcoin to the $200,000 to $250,000 range, possibly even touching $300,000 before a significant pullback. If history repeats itself, he envisions a correction to around $150,000, which would still be an incredibly bullish outcome. From there, his long-term projection sees Bitcoin rallying towards $700,000 and beyond in the next phases of adoption.